Hi, my name is Sandarya Srikanth, and I'm presenting my autism research on the predictive value and developmental trajectories of psychometric instruments used in autism screening and diagnosis, analyzed across age and sex. Today, I'll walk through the background, my research questions and aims, methodology, results, discussion, limitations, and ethical considerations of my study. First, let's start with the background. Autism spectrum disorder is a neurodevelopmental disorder characterized per DSM-5 by deficits in social communication alongside restricted and repetitive behaviors. Symptoms typically emerge between 18 and 24 months of age, with language and social delays becoming apparent by age 2 or 3. The AAP recommends developmental surveillance at 9, 15, and 30 months, with autism-specific screening at 18 and again at 24 to 30 months. Prevalence has risen sharply in recent years. The CDC reported 32.2 cases per 1,000 children in 2022, up from 6.6 cases in 2002. The field relies on several standardized instruments: the ADIR, a structured parent interview yielding a developmental history; the ADOS-2, a semi-structured observational assessment along with its derived severity score; the SRS-2, a 65-question quantitative assessment of social impairment; the SCQ, a caregiver or teacher-completed screening; the AQ, a self-report trait measure; and Vineland-3, which assesses adaptive behavior and real-world functioning. These instruments form the basis of my analysis. These tools can show a significant age bias. Only about 0.4% of autism studies include individuals over the age of 50, and psychometric performance degrades outside of childhood. The ADIR's pooled sensitivity drops to just 0.60 in broader adolescent cohorts, and the SRS-2 sensitivity declines further with comorbid conditions such as social anxiety disorder. There's also a documented sex bias. Validation samples have skewed heavily male, white, and Western, contributing to a roughly 4-to-1 male-to-female diagnostic ratio. The ADOS-2 and ADIR may have reduced sensitivity to the female behavioral phenotype, which tends towards internalizing symptoms such as anxiety and depression rather than the externalizing behaviors these instruments were normed to detect, which are compounded by the camouflaging behaviors that mask traits in females. These psychometric gaps carry clinical consequences. 1 in 4 adults and 1 in 3 autistic women report a prior misdiagnosis, often via diagnostic overshadowing, where autistic traits are misattributed to conditions like personality disorders or trauma-related disorders. Delayed identification is associated with long-term psychosocial harm, including educational underachievement and, in qualitative interviews, suicidal ideation. This is the gap that my project aims to address. My research question is, how does the predictive value and developmental trajectory of behavioral domains differ across age and sex? I have 3 aims. First, how individual domains evolve developmentally and which show the greatest change. Second, whether males and females differ in behavioral domain scores. And third, whether developmental trajectories differ by sex. My hypothesis was that the behavioral domains evolve non-linearly with age, with males and females exhibiting different trajectories. Now, onto the methodology. I used the Autism Brain Imaging Data Exchange, ABIDE 1 and 2, coordinated by the International Neuroimaging Data Sharing Initiative. ABIDE 1 contains data from 539 individuals with ASD and 573 controls. ABIDE 2 acts 1,114 further datasets with limited longitudinal tracking. I pooled both datasets to maximize sample size, retaining demographic variables such as age, sex, handedness, and collection site, alongside the standard clinical and cognitive assessments included in the database. The ADIR and AQ were excluded due to insufficient sample size, and subscores of the ADIR and ADOS were excluded since the analysis focused overall on composite scores. This left 8 behavioral domains to study: ADOS total, ADOS severity, SRS severity, SCQ total, Vineland ABC composite, and FIQ, VIQ, and PIQ. Missing or placeholder codes, negative and positive 999,000 and 999, were recoded as NA, and the range, mean, median, and standard deviation were computed for each domain using Python and Excel. For AIM-1, I restricted the sample to ASD participants and fit a generalized additive model per domain, score as a smooth function of age using penalized regression splines, with a smoothing parameter selected via a generalized cross-validation, and smooth term significance assessed against a null model using an approximate f-test. I reported effective degrees of freedom and percent deviance explained per domain. For AIM-2, I ran multiple linear regressions of each domain on sex controlling for age, reporting coefficients with 95% confidence intervals and standardized effect sizes. Model assumptions were checked via QQ and residual plots with Shapiro-Wilk and Bruch-Pagan tests, and Mann-Whitney used as a non-parametric sensitivity check where assumptions were violated. P-values were FDR corrected across the 8 domains. For AIM-3, I fixed sex-stratified GAMs per domain and compared a full model, allowing sex-specific curve shapes, against a reduced model with a shared shape and sex as a level shift, using a nested f-test to test whether the trajectory shape differs significantly by sex. A linear age-by-sex interaction model served as a secondary sensitivity check. Now here are the results. Vinland ABC showed the strongest age-related change with an EDF of 3.47 and a 19% deviance explained, followed by SEQ total at 7.3%. All remaining domains, the 3 IQ measures, ADOS total, ADOS severity, and SRS total, explained under 3% of deviance, indicating largely flat developmental trends. This forest plot for H2 shows the age-adjusted sex effect per domain, with 95% confidence intervals. Because every interval crosses 0, there are no statistically significant sex differences in overall scores for any domain after FDR correction and controlling for age. Finally, these panels show the sex-stratified trajectories with the 95% confidence bands. Given the smaller female sample, these estimates carry wider uncertainty and should be interpreted cautiously. Of the 8 domains, only SRS total showed a statistically significant interaction, indicating a sex-dependent trajectory shape. The remaining 7 domains showed statistically similar trajectories between the sexes. Taken together, Vinland adaptive measures and SEQ show real, meaningful developmental change with age, while IQ and ADOS measures remain comparatively stable. No domain showed a significant overall sex difference once age was controlled for. SRS total was the sole domain suggesting a sex-dependent developmental trajectory, though this should be treated as preliminary given the sample constraints. Broadly, ASD-related behavioral profiles in the sample were similar across sexes, with differences that were subtle rather than dramatic, supporting the use of flexible, nonlinear age modeling rather than assuming linear development. Several limitations apply. Female sample sizes were substantially smaller across domains, reducing the reliability of sex-stratified estimates, particularly in AIM-3. ADOS total aggregates scores across different test modules that aren't strictly compatible. GAM smoothing parameters involve some degree of researcher judgment. And finally, the data is drawn from a single pooled sample, limiting generalizability, and the design is cross-sectional, with trajectories estimated across individuals rather than observed longitudinally. Site-level differences in data collection also introduce missingness and potential clinician-level bias. Finally, as for ethical considerations, this study used de-identified secondary data rather than direct participant collection. I was careful not to overly interpret small and borderline findings and honestly reported both significant and insignificant findings. These are population-level statistical findings and not intended to inform individual clinical or diagnostic decisions. Thank you so much for your attention.